Tuesday, the Indiana Hoosiers stood at the White House as national champions. And later this Labor Day weekend, Coach Cignetti will be prepared to lead the field at the Indianapolis 500. And while the sport debates expanding the college football playoffs to 24 teams, Indiana is recruiting like a national powerhouse at the moment. The Hoosiers are no longer chasing relevance. They are in the conversation, and they can say a lot as they head into the summer months here on Hoosier Tailgate Live here tonight from the Hoosier.com studios. I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith. Appreciate you joining us here tonight. Got a good show here for you. In a few minutes, Colin McMahon's going to join us from the Hoosier.com. We're going to talk about some of these things that have come up over the last few days, the trip to the White House and kind of what that all entailed and kind of the representation that was ultimately there, although there were some guys missing because of their commitment to the NFL, which is clearly understood. And we'll talk about that. The expansion of 2014 playoff. It looks like that is something that is potentially a lot of teams, a lot of conferences are now buying into that mindset. And we'll talk a little bit about that, how that may impact ESPN's contract if it does go to a 2014 playoff and things of that nature. So it's going to be a really interesting dynamic about all that. We're also going to talk a little bit tonight about, again, somebody bringing up Indiana's non-conference schedule as it pertains to being soft. Connor O'Gara from IndyHoosier.si. And what's interesting about Connor, he's an Indiana grad who just happens to have a site that's Saturday in the South, where it's a predominant SEC website. He had some things again to say about Indiana's questionable non-conference schedule, and I just don't think we're back to that already. But we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second as well. If you could do me a favor, make sure you like and subscribe on the Hoosier.com YouTube page, as well as Hoosier Tailgate. Get notified with that little bell when we are going live next, as we get ourselves still on a week-to-week basis heading here into the summer months. We'll keep you up to date on everything as well going into this summer session. And it's hard to believe we're already, midway through the month of May for the most part. And kind of the next big thing is the Indy 500. We talked about that earlier. So wanted to get some things going here tonight and talking about some of this stuff, because it's going to ultimately impact some of the things that are going to go on through the months here. We're going to talk a little bit too about recruiting, what Indiana's been doing on the recruiting side of things. I know some have had some, concerns that while they are bringing in 4 and 5 stars, they have yet to land a 4 and 5 star in commitment wise. And I think you're going to see that maybe change here as we get through the month of May and early of June, but we'll talk about that as well. And of course, we'll talk about the playoffs and then finish it up with some final thoughts tonight. But let's go ahead and get Colin in here tonight, and let me get him all set up here so we can get him rolling. And let's see here. There we go. There he is, my man. Colin, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing okay? Good. How about yourself?
I'm doing good myself too, as I get you all set up here on both wide and tight. And appreciate you coming along and joining us now. A newly graduated Colin McMahon. He is a full-time adult now, right? And a full-time member of the Hoosier.com, is from what I'm understanding. So congratulations on all of those achievements. This past year, all you guys did a phenomenal job. Zach, yourself, all the guys that not football, but all the way through basketball and baseball. Great coverage as always, but congratulations to you for putting yourself in a position that now you're graduated and you get to do this in a full-time adult atmosphere, I guess you could say.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's certainly been a interesting past week. Graduating from college is obviously a cool experience. And then, coming back to the Hoosier, I'm excited for that, for another year of IU coverage. Obviously, there's a lot going on with both IU football and basketball, so it should be another really fun year.
Yeah, I mean, we're into I guess you say, the dog days of summer in some respects. We'll talk a little bit of recruiting down the road. If you have a question for tonight, by all means, put it in the chat. If we can get to it, we will, whether it's pertaining to the conversation we had or it's just a question that maybe you would like to have answered. We'll do our best to answer it for you as we get going here tonight. But, I guess the biggest thing that happened this week, Indiana and Coach Cignetti, with a pretty good group of returning Hoosiers, went out to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president and got to enjoy those festivities with a bunch of Hoosier alums and fans, per se. I know that you kind of covered that, even though I don't think you were out there, correct?
No, I was there. I was.
Oh, where you were there? Okay,
Yeah.
I thought maybe I saw where you did not go, but well, then that's even better. So, because now you can truly give us a first-hand account of everything that occurred on that day, and kind of what you were allowed to do and kind of what you weren't allowed to do, I guess you could say, when you go to the White House. But kind of fill us in on that day in particular. Kind of what it had to, the meaning of that to Indiana University overall. You're on a different platform. You're on something that's not just football related. It's across the spectrum of all the news coverage that you can find. But go ahead and give us a comment or two on that aspect of things when you think about it from a national media perspective.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it means a whole lot because right now, Indiana, when they won the national championship, blew up nationally. I mean, that's a given. You win a national championship, you have over 20 million eyes on you watching the game. And then after that, you have every single sports network talking about you, right? But that's just sports. Now you're talking about national political coverage across the nation. And that is way bigger than any sort of sports coverage that you're going to get. And, from my perspective, it was just kind of a surreal moment to see the president of the United States talk about the Indiana University football coach and the Indiana football program like he did. I mean, in Indiana, I mean, we've heard this over and over again. Indiana was the losingest FBS program. It was, as every bit of awful as a program could possibly be. And now you're at the White House. I mean, it's nothing short of incredible. And for as what I was allowed to do, I wasn't allowed to go actually inside the White House. The team was in there before their public appearance where there was the crowd where President Trump and then Cignetti spoke. I wasn't allowed to be in the White House before that. I had to be in the designated briefing room, in the press area, and that kind of thing. And then they brought us outside. So I wasn't exactly inside the White House per se, but for me, it was still an incredible experience. I mean, it's a once in a lifetime kind of deal where, I'm probably never going to be able to go to the White House again, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a special moment. It was a special moment just to be able to be in the back of the crowd and record all this on my phone and cover it for all of our audience at thehoosier.com. I mean, it was great. And it was kind of what I expected in terms of what President Trump said. Nothing really surprised me. He obviously has his way of speaking and doing all that, and that was pretty much exactly what happened. Cignetti fired up the crowd, and then Charlie Becker got up on the podium, and Jamari Sharp got up on the podium. So it was cool to see some players speak, and then after all that, they went into the Oval Office. I
Yeah.
wasn't able to go in the Oval Office, just White House media, and then the designated IU team media, news outlets and things like that were not allowed to go in, obviously, like I said. So, it was really cool to be there, and for the program. I mean, it puts you in a national eye that only the national champions are able to do. And not all the national champions have gone. I mean, Ohio State went last year, but then the 2 years before that, Georgia didn't go. Michigan didn't go when they won in 2023. Alabama didn't go their most recent time when they won because it was COVID. And so before Ohio State went, it had been 5 years since a national champion went. And so it's nice to see Indiana kind of continue that tradition, and hopefully more teams can go to the White House, because it really is a special moment for these young men who get to go and meet the president, and it doesn't have to be anything political. I know people like to try to make everything political, but no matter who is in the White House, it doesn't matter. It's a very cool and special experience, and they definitely earned it with a 16-0 season. That's for sure.
Colin McMahon joining us here from the Hoosier.com, talking about the Hoosiers' trip to Washington to meet the president. And you're correct. I do think, there were multiple guys that weren't able to join because of NFL commitments, not just Fernando. There were multiple other guys as well. The president did address, as if, I think what he had basically said is that Fernando called the White House to explain why he wasn't going to be there, because he was a Heisman Trophy winner and, all these things, that it was because he's the low man on the totem pole with the Raiders, didn't feel like it was something that he could miss a practice for, and decided that the best thing to do was to stay out in Vegas and participate in in whatever activity they had scheduled for that day, as did D'Angelo and Omar Cooper and Surratt. I mean, we can just go down the list, but there was no political undertone to that whatsoever. It was just the fact that those guys have moved on to the NFL, and they're trying to get a job that can pay them the bucks that they've been accustomed to over the last year or so in the college world. So nothing overly stated there. What I thought was interesting, and I don't know if you saw this, it seemed to me that Cignetti was like peering over the shoulder of the president as if he was trying to see, like he was cheating on a test, to see what he was going to say and the prepared remarks and things like that. Was that something that you kind of picked up on, or was that just something that maybe TV was something that was able to pick up on it?
Well, from my point of view, I was all the way in the back. I was behind all the chairs, kind of by the camera well. So I was there. So in person, it was not easy to see them.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of far. But when you do look at the videos, the tight shots of that, it did see. Yeah, I mean, not necessarily that he was trying to read what the
Yeah.
president had, because obviously he had a whole script of what he was trying to say. He obviously didn't memorize the game by game of Indiana's run to the national championship. So he kind of had an outline of what he was going to say, of all the stats he was going to read off, and everything. And it was funny to hear him read all that, and he would go, "Oh, Pat Coogan, the Rose Bowl MVP, where's Pat?" And then he wasn't there. And, "Oh, D'Angelo Pons had a pick six against Oregon, where's D'Angelo?" And then he wasn't there. And it was just it was a funny moment. Everybody was kind of laughing it off, and obviously, like you said, the Fernando moment when he explained that he called the president and then Vice President JD Vance, and you know I
Yeah,
wish I
because
could
he's
have
a
heard that
Buckeye.
phone call. Yeah,
Yeah,
I wish I could have
JD.
heard that phone call. But yeah, there was a photo of Curt Cignetti with JD Vance's kids,
Mm-hmm.
which is funny, sticking it to Ohio State and everything like that. But I mean, yeah, it was just a very cool experience. The people in the crowd were great. They were clapping and cheering, and then the Marine Corps band they had played, the IU fight song and everything. And it was a fun time. I mean, it was just a pleasant afternoon in its simplest form. And obviously, when you have national coverage, it becomes a lot more than that. But the event itself lasted only about a half hour at the
Yeah.
most, and it was just a nice time. And you could tell. I mean, Signetti was smiling throughout the entire thing. I mean, he
Oh
he was
yeah.
just having a great time. I mean, you could just tell. And when he got up to the podium and he started chanting Hoosiers and getting the crowd going, and
Yeah, that would.
it's just, yeah, it's just a good representation of where Indiana football is at. I mean, it's in a
Yeah,
very,
the
very good place.
where that was
Go ahead.
held is a very bigger area that I guess TV probably doesn't do it justice in terms of how big that area really is in retrospect and everything. But at the same time, there seemed to be a lot of not alumni there from in and around that area, which I'm sure Indiana has a big alumni base in that area, Virginia and Maryland and so forth and so on. But it was very well attended. It seemed to on
Yeah,
TV.
yeah, so, you couldn't buy a ticket, like a normal fan, and like normal's relative, but a average fan couldn't go and get a ticket for this. You had to either be invited through a political route, which involved like being associated with a congressperson or a state
Hmm.
legislator from Indiana, or there would have been donors there from the university, so
Hmm.
high-ranking people in that regard. And obviously Pam Whitten was there, and Scott Dolson was there, and then a lot of Congress people, Indiana senators, were there, and they all got a recognition from President Trump to begin the whole thing. And it was funny on my flight back to Indy. There were a bunch of people near me that were at the White House. Their suits and ties pretty much gave that away. And I asked them, "Oh, how did you get to go to the White House?" And they said that they were a part of the Indiana Soybean Alliance, which is associated with the Agricultural Committee in Congress, and so they
Hmm.
have a close relationship with the Congress people from Indiana, and so they were invited, and they said that 15 of them got to go. And it was funny, the lady I was talking to is an IU grad and IU fan, but she said that most of the people on this agriculture committee that work with the Soybean Alliance was Purdue grads, because Purdue has the agriculture program in the state.
That's
IU doesn't
right.
have an agriculture program. So that was kind of funny to hear. But yeah, it was big for the state of Indiana, having so many representatives and legislators there, and relatively speaking, Indiana is on the smaller end of all 50
Yeah,
states. Most political people talk about California, Texas, New York, Florida, etc.
sure.
The East Coast bias you hear, the West Coast bias you hear. Indiana is a flyover state to most people, so it's really nice to see the state, um, in addition to the football program, be put on that stage as well.
Yeah, no question. And we'll wrap that kind of up. But again, it was a definite well-meaning honor for Indiana when it comes to all this, as it pertains to what it all does for the university on a national level, and understanding that that in itself is worth the commercial that you could buy in any 50 states, is that aspect of things right there and there. So it was a good day to see that. And it was a good thing that Indiana was well represented from many different facets of that. Moving on to this, we've talked about the national prominence that Indiana's been under now, something they haven't seen in quite some time. I mean, they are a national program now because of what they've done in the 24 months that Coach Cignetti has been a head coach. And now, national championship, Big Ten championship. We just talked about the White House. But I came across this today, and this kind of goes hand in hand with, I guess, in some ways, the new 24 team potential expansion of the college football playoffs that we may get into in a little bit. But this gentleman, Connor O'Gara, I think that's how you pronounce it. He's an Indiana grad. He's also runs another website podcast that is, I think, called Saturdays in the South, which is pretty much a predominant SEC flavored type of podcast slash website in that respect. But once again, here we go about nitpicking who Indiana's going to play in the non-conference schedule and how this, in some aspect of things, uh, may jeopardize what would happen to them if they would finish 10-2 and be left out of the college football playoffs, not being one of the 12s. But again, there were several teams, not just Indiana, now have canceled some Power Five games for this year because there's no sense of playing those type of games and risking injury and things like that when the biggest aspect of things are your conference and how you do there and how you come out there and putting yourself in the best possible position to get there again. But he really, I don't know, did you get a chance to see any of this article? Did you read it or anything?
No, not this specific one, but
Okay.
I've certainly heard about obviously the critique and the criticism of IU's non-conference schedule.
Yeah. And again, this is an Indiana grad through Indiana SI. I don't know if he's now a part of that writing for them or not, because like I said, he's predominantly been the Saturday Down South website. But again, they bring in this thing about non-conference schedule and them not playing anybody. And, where other teams such as Texas and Ohio State and, some of them, Notre Dame to a degree, are playing a quote unquote what they perceive to be a tougher non-conference schedule. Well, Indiana's non-conference schedule this year is actually pretty decent. You got North Texas, who did quite well in the Conference USA a year ago. Now, Howard, again, you're going to have those one AA schools, in that regard and things of that nature. But this was more about Indiana not being tested enough before their October 17th matchup against Ohio State when the Buckeyes come to town. Again, I hate to dwell on these points, but do you believe in today's football, regardless if it's Indiana or Ohio State, that one's non-conference schedule plays an integral part on whether a team gets in or doesn't get into the college football playoffs?
I don't think that the non-conference schedule in itself should play a role. I think your schedule as a whole is what you need to take into account, right? So, for example, if you have a really bad non-conference schedule and then you play a ton of opponents in conference that are really, really good, then, you kind of get a pass there, right? And so Indiana last year, no one was really talking about the non-conference schedule because they beat Oregon on the road, which was a great win, and then they beat Penn State on the road, another solid win. They beat Iowa on the road, another solid win. They beat Illinois at home, which was a good win as well. So you had all those wins going for you on the resume. The year before, however, in 2024, IU was obviously 11-1 and made the college football playoff. But if they were 10-2, they would not have made the college football playoff, right? They were the last at large. They were the second to last, at large team to make the college football playoff. And so if they would have lost another game, they would have been out at 10-2 because their schedule was weak. Their conference schedule ended up being very, very weak. Their best win would have been, arguably Michigan. You could maybe say Nebraska, I guess. I mean, these aren't quality wins. And so they would have certainly benefited from a non-conference game to boost their resume. This year, schedule looks fairly tough, but some teams could really, really disappoint, right? In 2024, you had Michigan and Washington, the previous national champion and runner-up, both on the schedule, and they both turned out to be not as good. And so you're really rolling the dice with the weak non-conference schedule. That's more of what it is. Where 10-2 could definitely make the playoff next year. 10-2 could also definitely miss the playoff next year. It all depends on how the schedule you know, comes to fruition, and it depends on how the SEC shakes out, right? Last year, you know, the SEC kind of had a down year. I mean, I would say, and then this year maybe they won't. I mean, there are so many factors at play where it really is kind of a gamble having three non-power four teams to make up your non-conference schedule. And IU is one of only five teams in the power four to not have scheduled a power four team in their non-conference schedule. The ACC forces you to, the SEC forces you to, and the Big 12 forces you to. And obviously, you know, Notre Dame, it doesn't count because they're not in a conference. So every other power four team has a non-conference opponent that is also a power four school, except for
And
five.
yeah,
One of
but those schedules are more or less your rivalry games. You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
Yeah.
So that's where Indiana playing, 10 conference games versus, the SEC only playing 8 or 9. Now they're going to bump it up and play, the same equal amount of conference games, which be it. I think what this gentleman was trying to point out, and this goes back to the graph here about Power Four school records against ranked opponents in the college football playoff year. Indiana's two opponents before they play Ohio State, which I do believe is, I think it's Rutgers and Nebraska, if I'm not missing something there, but I'd have to
It's
double check.
Northwestern, Rutgers, and Nebraska are
Yeah.
the three first ones. Yeah.
Okay. Those guys are a playoff, are a accounted for the worst record versus AP top 25 at 2-71 combined. And that's all before they play Ohio State. So his point is this, because their conference schedule leading up to Ohio State is weak in his mind, and their non-conference is weak, Indiana will be going into Ohio State without really a favorable game to really determine how good they may be or how good they may not be. And that will be something that the critics were going to say come Ohio State week. If Indiana goes into that game undefeated, you can just write it down now. They are going to talk about the lead up to this game and who has Indiana played. I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I mean, I think winning a national championship changes everything, like truly. Because there are going to be some people that are just going to criticize no matter what. Winning five national championships still wouldn't shut them up. I mean, there's always going to be people out there. But the majority of folks, I do think that their minds changed after winning the national championship. You go 16-0, and I mean, they just shut everybody up, right? Like they beat powerhouse Alabama. They beat Oregon again. They said they couldn't beat Oregon twice. They did that. And then you beat a Miami team, which, you know, wasn't necessarily a favorite to win the college football playoff when it started, but you know, they proved everybody wrong, and they beat Ohio State, and then they beat Georgia, or Ole Miss, excuse me. And then, you know, IU proved that having a weak non-conference schedule doesn't mean you're unprepared for the rest of the season. They
Yeah.
proved that. I mean, right?
Now,
I and this year's a little bit different because, you know, you get Ohio State at home, and it's a rematch of the Big Ten championship, and it's going to be the biggest game day weekend in Indiana University history. I mean, it's going to be insane. Like whatever Illinois was last year, and that was crazy, it's going to be, you know, multiply that by 10 for
mhm.
this year, Ohio State. I mean, there's going to be people saying that kind of thing, but I mean, it's kind of baseless at this point, coming off a national title, in my opinion.
This is
And
one thing. Go ahead.
I think the only issue, and like he did mention in the article, is that, you know, they might be a little unprepared going into Ohio State. Not necessarily that there's going to be a trap game looking ahead. I mean, I don't foresee that personally. They might be a little unprepared, but the way Curt Cignetti prepares his teams, I mean, I don't think that is really a true concern, because even 2 years ago, when IU went into Ohio State in 2024, I mean, the consensus after the game was, oh, they weren't battle tested, they weren't ready. Well, I mean, they had a 7-0 lead at the end of the first quarter, right? And as the game went on, it got out of hand, but they weren't unprepared to start that game. That's for sure. So I think that the concerns are a little bit overblown. I think that the Ohio State game is going to be obviously a massive game between two really good teams, but I think the schedule talk is a little bit overblown in that sense. And the only conversation that I feel like the non-conference schedule will bring is if IU ends up at 10-2, and where you have one team maybe from the SEC or Big 12 that has a big non-conference win, and then IU doesn't, and that might be like a little bit of a tiebreaker there. But other than that specific situation, I really don't think it's that big of a deal. I think the only thing you're missing is sort of that fan excitement, fan engagement of having a big non-conference game, like if Notre Dame were to come to town, or if Kentucky were to come to town, that'd be a big one, or any SEC team, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
would be
Mm-hmm.
a really big game. And so you're missing out on that. But other than that, I don't think it will determine too much.
Yeah. Again, I think Indiana's going to try to schedule two P5 schools and a one AA school each and every year. And that's kind of how they're going to go about the non-conference. I think this is the point that I think that he was also trying to make about this, is that don't be convinced that Indiana's newfound championships, Big Ten and defending national championship status, will be somehow the difference if Indiana is a 10-2 team going into the college football playoffs, and thinking that because they are the defending champions of the Big Ten and of college football and the national championship, that is probably not going to sway a selection committee in putting them in over somebody because of that. And while there's part of me that tends to agree with that, because Indiana still has to prove that they can handle success and they got to back everything up because they're still in infancy status. They don't have the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Ohio States, the Michigans track record to really say they can fall back on that. So while this points out a lot of things in terms of what we've heard before, I also think he was also trying to clarify that Indiana still has to perform quite well because they are still not looked at as being that national leader when it comes to college football. And we shall see. But again, I thought it was a good thing to discuss and talk about. And now we can put that away. We'll talk a little bit more about the expansion in the playoffs. We also come back and talk a little bit about recruiting. But for right now, we're going to step aside and take a break here on the Hoosier Tailgate Live on thehoosier.com. We'll be back right after this.
Hoosier fans, if you want the best coverage of Indiana football, basketball, recruiting, and the Big Ten, there's only one place to be. Join thehoosier.com, powered by On3. Get insider recruiting intel, team news, transfer portal updates, premium analysis, and exclusive coverage from the staff that covers Indiana athletics every single day. Right now, new subscribers can get 50% off their first year. And after that, it's just $119.99 per year. Don't miss breaking news, VIP content, and championship-level coverage. Visit thehoosier.com today and stay ahead of the game. Thehoosier.com, your home for Indiana Hoosiers coverage. Indiana football fans, get your officially licensed Indiana gear today at the Hoosier Tailgate Fanatics storefront. Jerseys, hoodies, hats, collectibles, tailgate gear, and championship apparel, all in one place. Look for the link in the description to the Hoosier Tailgate storefront and gear up today.
Welcome back here to the Hoosier Tailgate live on the Hoosier.com. I am the Coach Griff alongside my buddy Colin McMahon. We are here talking Indiana football on a broader base tonight because we're at that time of year where everything is kind of on the back burner when it comes to these things because of where we're at with entering the summer months. We just talked about graduation, Colin being one of those that graduated. We're also in that time period, coaches are out spring recruiting now, getting out to see the class of 27, the class of 28, as they work ahead on all that. And Indiana's had quite a bit of visitors on campus already. But earlier today, as you can see on the diagram there, or graphic there, Steve Wiltfong from the Rivals.com, and he's the resident guru. And I don't know if you saw this as well, Colin, is that Moshawn Sales, the big-time wide receiver, number one in the class of 2027, out of Lawrence North in Indianapolis, Steve Wiltfong gave a prediction that Indiana will land him as a commitment, and he sees that at 60% over Alabama and Ohio State. Alabama had been the early favorite for the most part, but it seems now that Indiana has put themselves in a position to potentially land Moshawn Sales' athletic ability, we'd say. He's 6'5". He's a big, tall, lanky guy. Thoughts on that, Colin? That came out today about around 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah, when I first saw it, it was, a little bit of a surprise. But personally, I kind of held the belief that Indiana was right in the thick of it. But when you're competing with Alabama and Ohio State for the number one receiver in a class, a part of you just assumes that they're not going to pick Indiana. I mean, Curt Cignetti won a national championship with the lowest blue chip rating ever. I mean, he did not have a 5-star on this roster, obviously, and didn't have a 4-star on this roster, right? And I think that getting a guy like Moshawn Sales is huge for the on-field production, because he's obviously an incredible talent. But just to get a guy of that caliber and that recruiting pedigree is huge. And I mean, Cignetti talks, I don't look at recruiting stars. I don't look at this. I don't look at that. But, generally 5 stars are better players than 4 stars, and 4 stars are better player than 3 stars. And that's not black and white. You can obviously win a national championship with guys who are under-recruited. But to sustain this over a long period of time, you need to build the foundation, and that foundation comes from recruiting classes. And you obviously don't win games from being the top-rated recruiting class. But if you're able to get players that fit Cignetti's mentality and fit Cignetti's vision while also being superior athletes, that's huge. And that's exactly what Indiana wants to do, where they want to get guys that are going to buy into everything that Cignetti is preaching, that they're going to be, determined and have that discipline that Indiana football demands, but are also incredible athletes and the caliber of player that can sustain championship level success season in and season out. And Moshawn Sales would do exactly that. Obviously, they brought in the number one player overall in the class of 2027. That obviously being Jalen Brewster, who is currently committed to Texas Tech, but he's still going on visits and has his recruitment open for other schools. I don't think Indiana necessarily is going to land Brewster, but just to have him visit during Little 500 weekend, during spring game weekend is huge. Seeing Indiana next to some of these schools' names in their Final Four and their Final Five, whatever it may be, seeing Indiana next to Ohio State, Alabama, Miami, Florida, LSU, Clemson, You go on and on. It really is incredible, and it shows where the program is, not only in the recruiting stage, but just overall, where players are considering Indiana, where you have a 50,000 seat stadium. They're choosing them alongside of schools that have 100,000 seat stadiums that have been powerhouses for decades, and it shows that Cignetti is in his vision and his mentality and everything that he stands for is really popular with these kids. And I think he's even more popular with the parents. I think parents want their sons to play for Curt Cignetti because of the way that he prepares young men not only to succeed in college and not only to succeed and make the NFL, but prepare them as human beings. And I think that's a huge part of this, of the culture that Indiana's building. And for Indiana to even have a prediction for a guy like Monchin Sales is huge. And I mean, it's a great sign for where Sales is at. And obviously, it's not a done deal yet, but it's certainly trending in the right direction right now.
Well, again, we were talking about this a little bit this morning, and I heard some people that were kind of concerned that Indiana was bringing in recruits, especially the 4-star recruits, but yet had not landed one, and understandable in that respect. But at the same time, you just never know when these guys are going to say they're coming. But always remember, it's a long way till December, because a commitment from a kid today in the grand scheme of things means very little. It's bona fide in December when they put their name to paper. So just remember that, and a lot of things can happen between now and then. Big day tomorrow for recruiting. They got a good group of guys on campus, 8 of them. We'll see if they all are still planning on being there. Of course, you've got kid out of South Carolina, running back, he's a 4-star. The kid out of Mount Carmel, linebacker, he's really good. This Roman, he's a really good linebacker out of a big time high school program there, Mount Carmel. He's a 4-star. Black out of New Madison, Ohio, 6'5", 280. As you can see, they're going to battle some of these teams that are going to provide, for their services. Miles Smith out of Farmington Hills, Michigan. He's an edge player. I want to say, did he make a commitment today, or was I thinking of somebody else? Because I thought I saw somewhere that he may have made a commitment, but that may have been somebody else from the Farmington, Michigan program. But again, good solid player, but you can see Michigan State, big one in state here. Caleb Johnson, big offensive lineman out of Noblesville. This is where Indiana has to do the job that they've not been able to do for a number of years, not just under Cignetti, but other previous coaches, is keeping 4- and 5-star talented athletes at home. And keeping a guy like Caleb Johnson, for instance, at home, that is a really good offensive lineman. He's an OT, 6'5", 270. He moves well. Iowa has come into Indiana and taken players out of Indiana, right out under the noses of Indiana and Purdue, and they've gone pretty well with that. But this Caleb Johnson kid, he can play. And I don't know if you've seen anything on him to date, Colin, but here's again, like I said, keeping Indiana kids for the most part at home has to be where Indiana starts to break the barrier of the 4-star, 5-star recruit.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up Noblesville and Caleb Johnson. There's another offensive lineman from Noblesville, Mason McDermott, another 4-star who's visiting this weekend. And so I suppose they're going on the visit together. I don't have confirmation that they're going on the visit together, if they'll be doing everything, with each other. But, if you can kind of form roots in the state, that's huge, right? And Cignetti's talked about that, where he wants to build roots in Indiana and Ohio and Michigan, Illinois, Kentucky, all the bordering states. And that's kind of your recruiting base. And obviously you're going to go into Georgia, you're going to go into Florida, hotbeds for football where you can go get guys. that might be under recruited, not necessarily recruited by SEC schools, and get those guys as well. And that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of where you want to build your foundation for the future classes. And each year since Cignetti has taken over, the recruiting class has been higher ranked than the last. And obviously, recruiting classes and the rankings aren't everything. Indiana is Exhibit A, disproving that. But it definitely means something for building that foundation. Like I've said, you can't rely on the portal each and every year. You can't go and get 20 guys in the transfer portal each and every year. That's not sustainable. And Indiana was able to find success in the portal mostly because the guys they were getting were from JMU, and they obviously went to a new school, but it wasn't like they were unfamiliar with each other. There was already that leadership brought in, and all those guys from JMU, Surratt, Fisher, Pons, Kalen Black, Kamara, et cetera, et cetera. Those were the leaders that helped bridge the gap in terms of building the culture. And so that's why you kind of need to build a foundation where you have players hopefully staying for 3-4 years before you send them off to the pros. And that starts with recruiting guys in state and things like that. And so it really is critical. This recruiting class won't affect IU this season, obviously, or even next season. Cignetti has said that, freshmen you need to develop. That's kind of the first and foremost thing for them. And it's rare to see a true freshman really contribute. And so, developing them is second after getting them. And then you kind of, elevate their role, and then they become the next group of Hoosiers that hopes to succeed. And so, it starts right here.
Yeah, we're looking at the commitments now. As a question came in from David, is the Tolbert kid from Cincinnati, is he still committed? As of right now, he is. And again, 4-star kid out of Cincinnati, Princeton, big time program. Got a kid out of Louisville that's committed, the Hobbs kid. Purcell, the quarterback from Maine South. I saw him at the New Jersey Elite, the Elite 11 quarterback. I know it's a camp, but it's a kind of like a competition. He really throws the ball well for a lefty. He can spin it. I was impressed by his tape that I got to watch of him throw the football, and he opened a lot of eyes out there on the East Coast. But he's a kid that I think has worked hard on Sons as well. Sales, excuse me. The Jones, the big OT from Michigan City, he's a project kid, but the kid can move. And these are the four predominant commitments that Indiana has of right now. This is all on the rival site that you get as a part of the Indiana and the Hoosier.com website. You get this opportunity to get the stuff off of rivals. Right now, as you can see, Indiana 34th ranked overall, and it keeps you abreast of all that, as well as the number of offers that Indiana may have outstanding in that respect. So again, great things that we see there with the website, and make sure you get out there to the Hoosier.com to get all that taken care of so you can take part of everything that's offered there in that subscription. Now we're going to talk about here before we get into the final segment of things is, again, I'm trying to get my man in the picture here because it keeps going out on me because I'm not great with technology, as we can see. Is the Indiana and Curt Cignetti and his foray into the Indianapolis 500 as the pace car driver here in a couple weeks, Labor Day weekend. And I found it interesting that of all the things that came across Coach Cignetti's desk, he turned down more opportunities, football related, except this one, which was pretty smart by him. I don't think he turned down the Indianapolis 500 because it's the greatest spectacle in sports, so to speak. And right now, that's going to be a big day there at the Brickyard. But kind kind of allude some of the things in that respect about this 500 and kind of all the things that how this all kind of came about for him and being the one chosen to be the pace car driver for the 500.
Yeah, like you said, he said no to pretty much everything except for the White House, obviously, and then the
Mm-hmm.
Indy 500. And as far as that goes, those are two pretty good things to say yes to, I would say. But IU runs a fairly closed program. They don't bring in too much media coverage outside of the day-to-day IU reporters. Obviously, Cignetti just did a one-on-one interview with Josh Pate of his college football
Mm-hmm.
show, but seeing that is a bit rare. Most of the time, it's just honestly the Big Ten Network that kind of gets those special interviews and things like that. So they run a pretty closed-off program. Cignetti wants to keep everything in-house. He wants to make sure that everybody is bought into his vision. They want to make sure that there are no distractions and they're focusing on football, improving every day, et cetera, et cetera. And so seeing this doesn't come too much of a surprise because, who's going to say no to the largest single day sporting event attendance in the country? And he's going to be doing that, the pace car. And for me, I'm not a Indiana native. I mean, I've been here for the past 3 years at IU, and then we'll continue this year as well. But I didn't grow up here. I was not really, into racing. I'm still not into racing, but this year I'm going to be at the Indy 500 as a spectator. I'm going to go to IMS for the first time, and so I'm very excited for that, to see what that all entails. I'm going in a little bit blind. I don't really know exactly, what goes on during this 200 lap race, just because I mean, I've never really watched racing, and so I mean, it's going to be really cool to see the Indiana football coach driving this, insane Corvette around this track. And it's funny. He was asked a question during spring ball about
Yes.
what's the fastest he's ever driven a car, and he goes, "I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that." And he said it was on the freeway late at night. He has an Audi, and those things can go pretty fast. So I can only imagine how fast it really was. And so I'm sure he'll be ready for the task when he gets behind the wheel in the pace car and is able to lead the cars into the green flag for the Indianapolis 500. So it should be really cool. I'm certainly excited for it, to see it, and to experience all that the Indy 500 brings.
Yeah, and I think Cignetti's probably practicing as well because he comes from an area similar to you that probably doesn't have much of a background about the Indianapolis 500, but I'm sure he's gotten pretty familiar with it the last 2 years. But that will be an interesting dynamic because I know that he does like to go a little fast, as they would say. A couple quick questions here before we wrap things up tonight. We've talked about the possibility of a 2014 playoff coming up, as the ACC, the Big 12, and I'm missing one. ACC, Big 12, Big 10, of course, all want to go to a 2014 playoffs, where the SEC would rather see it stop at, I believe it's 16, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
ESPN wants it to stay between 12 and 16, or capped at 14, because if it does, they continue with the rights to it. Anything above that, ESPN becomes a second player because they have to go back and bid for the rights to broadcast. Do you think we go to 24? Do you think we're going to double the number of teams in it from a 12-team college football to a 24-team? And get rid of the conference championship games and such, and have some games that may be playing games?
Yeah, that's definitely what's going to happen. I mean, it seems inevitable at this point that they're going to go and expand. Now, I wouldn't say 24 is a given. It's the more likely outcome, I would say, at this point. 16 is still a possibility, and that's honestly what I would prefer. Not that that matters, because you know I don't get a say. No one's going to ask beat writers what they think, even though we certainly like to give our opinion. But 24 seems like the most likely outcome now that you have the Big 12, the ACC, and the Big 10, obviously, pushing for that. And with that, you would eliminate conference championship games. And what the Big 10 proposed is where you might have play-in games in lieu of a conference championship game. Some people are advocating for keeping the championship games, where you would have number 1 and number 2 playing each other for the championship, right. And then the 3 plays the 6 and the 4 plays the 5, and both those are play-in games where the 1 and 2 is just kind of a championship game where the winner gets to say they're conference champions, but both make the playoff regardless. And I think having a game like that is a little silly because everyone wants to win the big one. Winning a conference championship in this day and age is great, but it's not the end-all be-all. You want to win it all. If Indiana would have won the Big Ten and then fell short in the playoff, people would have still been happy, certainly, but there would have been, a sense of, what could have been, right? Mm-hmm. It wouldn't have been that much of a sense of satisfaction in that way. And so I do think eliminating conference championship games is the best way to do this. I think that, if you keep expanding, it's just going to be too many games. You're going to see guys where they might be a little burned out at the end of the season. Indiana had a couple of guys, namely Carter Smith, get injured in that national championship game, and he missed spring ball because of that. He needed surgery after the championship game, even though it wasn't a major injury. It was just the wear and tear from the 16-game season, weighing on you. It's not easy. People like to argue, the NFL has a 17-game schedule. Well, these guys are not professionals. I mean, a lot of these guys are never going to play in the NFL. The vast majority of them. It's very, very select few make the NFL, and Indiana is lucky enough to have 14 different guys go to the NFL via the draft or signing. And so, it's an interesting question because expansion seems inevitable. But, we've seen expansion before from 4 to 12, and I would say that was a success. But does that mean that it's going to be a success again? I'm not so sure. I think that 12 seems like a good number because how many of the 12 do you think could have won a championship last year? Maybe 10 at the most, right? I don't think the group of 5 teams are winning a championship.
No.
There were 2 of them last year. So why are we expanding it beyond that, where you're including teams that cannot play for a national championship? That was the whole reason you expanded past 4, was because there were teams that missed out that could have definitely won a national championship if they got the right to play for it. I hold the belief that on any given year, there's anywhere from 5 to 10 teams that can win a national championship. I haven't seen a year personally where there's been more than that. And so I think expanding past 12, you're kind of just inviting an opportunity for upsets to happen where then you might not get the best teams competing for the title in the end. And is that something that college football wants?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure.
Well, again, it's going to be a question that we're going to have to eventually answer. I know money becomes a big factor in it. And with the rising cost and everything, it may be something they have to do out of necessity. But at the end of the day, that's something that we will have to wait and see because they're still locked into 12 this year. And that's all the number that we need to worry about right now. Colin, I appreciate you being here with us tonight to talk about some of these things here on the Hoosier Tailgate. And don't forget to get over to Hoosier.com and you can see all of Colin's writings and stuff over there as he will be updating throughout the summer, as well as going to the Big Ten Media Day, which will be really right around the corner in the month of July. So appreciate you being with us here tonight and look forward to talking to you again here shortly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Excited to be on soon. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, for Colin McMahon, I'm the coach Shannon Griffith. This has been the Hoosier Tailgate Live here on the Hoosier.com. We're off next week to enjoy the Labor Day weekend, back again on the 28th of May. We'll see you then, all right here on the Hoosier Tailgate. Good night, everybody.